All right. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I before we get going, I just want to acknowledge one of our people that just recently passed away. One of our advocates, Mr. David Milgaard. Anyways, I was sort of playing a song for him a little bit there, written about him. My name is Kimberly Beaudin. I'm the National Vice Chief of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. In 1994, Canada's justice system stole the lives of Odelia and Nerissa Quewezance for nearly 30 years later, and the justices continue. Odelia and Nerissa have been wrongfully convicted of a murder of Anthony Dolff. 2 life sentences for a crime another person has recently confessed to. 19 years since the two, it's been 19 years since the two saw each other, the 2 sisters. Racism, residential school, a biased justice system, and police all contributed to this monumental failure. With the onset of Nerissa and Odelia were denied justice, denied the right to a lawyer for days after their arrest. Police have been targeting the Indigenous community following a string of crimes in the area, and they were determined to send a message. That message cost Quewezance sisters nearly 3 decades of their lives. Racism and lack of cultural understanding among police forces is still a problem right across Turtle Island, and sadly, Indigenous people often pay the price. Making matters worse, the Saskatchewan government stood by, refusing to intervene in the case. We recently received correspondence by the government of Saskatchewan. They say there's no basis in any interference at all or any review or whatnot. It's totally baffled by that one. Their inaction cost Nerissa and Odelia 30 years of their lives and only highlighted how deep systemic racism runs at all levels of government. Indigenous women make up nearly half of all prisoners in federal custody across Canada and Saskatchewan. That figure has already ballooned to 98%. Indigenous women have led the way in life sentences. Stats Canada should be ashamed of themselves. Making matters worse, 2 women faced an all-white jury. Governments must immediately ensure Indigenous people face a jury of their peers, otherwise the lasting effects of colonialism will continue to send our women and girls behind bars. For years now, the Office of the Correctional Investigator has been highlighting these systemic injustices, but things have only gotten worse. Nerissa and Odelia, like so many Indigenous women, have fallen victim to a broken system. The sister's cousin, Jason Keshane, who was 14 at the time, has admitted several times to murdering Mr. Dolff. Despite the confession, Odelia and Nerissa continue to pay the price. The Congress of Aboriginal Peoples demands Canada's Justice Minister David Lametti issue a retrial for both sisters. This shameful injustice cannot be ignored any longer. It's time for Odelia and Nerissa to be cleared of their crime and given their freedom back. Now, we're going to have Odelia speak, James, Kim Pate, Leah Gazan, and Nicole. So, Odelia, come up and speak.
Oh, okay. Good day. My name's Odelia Cuisance. I'm here today to speak about my situation and my circumstance that I'm in today. And first, I just want to ask today for justice for me and my sister. It's been 30 years. 30 years of a lot of, I'm not sure how to explain it. And today, I'm nervous right now. But you know what? I was wanted today. I come here not prepared with a speech, not prepared with anything, because I know I come here to speak from my heart. You know, because I honestly believe that's where your truth comes from. And I come to hear on behalf of my sister Nerissa, who could not be here because of the circumstances, and she's locked up, you know, and it's been 30 years. And I just want to explain, I was telling one of my friends, you know, 30 years later, I met David Melgard. Today I want to acknowledge him because David Melgard's the one that helped me at the beginning, and now he's gone, but I know he's still here in spirit. David Melgard could relate to what me and my sister been through because we've been wrongfully accused, and it's finally like just 2 years in November that we're finally being heard. And it kind of reminds me of, I'm a survivor of the residential school, and on my reservation in Keeseekoose in Saskatchewan, they found some unmarked graves with babies. And that kind of reminds me of me. Look at how long those babies and children were there. And now, and me and Nerissa are finally being heard. And I'm asking for justice today. And it's like similar stories, and the babies are found, and I'm grateful today. And like 30 years is a long time. That's cruel and unusual punishment. And you know what? I'm gonna kind of relate to, even animals don't get locked up like that. You know, today I do suffer with PSD and all that stuff because, you know, sitting in prison for so many years wondering, you know, why? It angers me. And it's not good. I'm so institutionalized. I know I didn't deserve this. I just recently got out on parole after how many years? 13 years. And I have my children that need me home. And I'm asking to be free today. I'm asking to be free because I know in my heart I did not kill Mr. Dolff. I'm sorry that happened, but I can only, you know, I'm just asking. My sister is still suffering in prison, and she doesn't deserve that. And I don't deserve it. And being a survivor of residential school, I've been in residential school from 6 till I was, 6 till 10 or 11. And then being in prison for 30 years. So I've been locked up, confined for years and years. And yeah, that's all I have to say right now. Okay.
That's great.
Okay.
Odelia. Give you a mask.
Good morning. My name's James Lockyer. I'm here on behalf of Innocence Canada. And you've heard David Milgaard mentioned by both the previous speakers. It was David Milgaard and APTN News who got us, Innocence Canada, involved in the case of the Quewezance sisters. Nerissa, as you heard, is still in jail. She was denied parole again about 3 weeks ago, and she's in the Fraser Valley Institution in New Westminster, British Columbia. And Odelia now has day parole. That means she's allowed out every now and then, but under strict supervision. She's here today with the permission of the parole board, and she got day parole just about 4 weeks ago. So here you have two women, sisters, girls when it all happened, who have been in prison for 30 years. If they'd been white, would they have been arrested in the first place for the murder? Probably not. If they were white and they'd been arrested for the murder, would they have been convicted of it? No. And if they were white and they'd been convicted of the murder, would they by now be out on parole? Absolutely, for sure they would. Of course they would. And that helps us understand how our justice system treats the Indigenous. And Nerissa and Odelia and Nerissa are just examples of how our system treats the Indigenous, especially Indigenous women. Back in November of last year, one of the first things that I did for Innocence Canada was ask Saskatchewan Justice to join me in asking the Minister of Justice here, Minister Lametti, to set aside or quash the convictions of the two sisters. 4 months later, the ADM, or Assistant Deputy Minister of Saskatchewan, writes and says in one sentence, the Crown does not see a basis to reconsider the verdicts of the sisters. So Saskatchewan Justice, the Ministry of Justice in Saskatchewan, continues to fail the two sisters. And their fate now is in Minister Lametti's hands. Just 2 weeks ago, I went with Odelia to the Keeseekoose Reserve in Saskatchewan, where the events happened back in 1993. And I interviewed the man who actually did the stabbing that the two sisters have been convicted of. Speed really is of the essence, and that's as much as anything the purpose of today is to ask the minister to get a move on, to get on with it. Nerissa was 18 when she was arrested. She's now 48 and still in jail. Odelia was 20. She's now 50. The two sisters, they need their lives back. And hopefully today will just be a step in that direction. Thank you.
My name is Kim Pate. I have the privilege and honor of having known Nerissa and Odelia since they entered the prison system 30 years ago. And I want to publicly thank you for the incredible honor and responsibility that gifting me this feather yesterday brings. I don't take it at all lightly. Some of you will know that a couple of weeks ago we released this report, Injustices and Miscarriages of Justice Experienced by 12 Indigenous Women. One of them has died just before we were able to submit that report to the Minister of Justice. This week we wrote to the Minister of Public Safety requesting that he consider employing the Royal Prerogative of Mercy for these 12 women. There is a reason that we have focused on the 12 women. They're the women that I know very well, that I've known for decades now. They are not the only women, though. And as the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls pointed out, the links, as Odelia has so clearly articulated today, between residential school, forced removal of children and peoples from lands, to the incarceration of Indigenous people, particularly women, and most especially in the provinces of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, is beyond a crisis. I don't know what you call something that's worse than a crisis. It is certainly the genocide that the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry identified, and it certainly calls for the implementation of the calls for justice of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry and the calls to action of the TRC. We need to see action now. We cannot wait for more good platitudes, more intentions, more good intentions. We need to see action. And one of the things that could also be acted on right now is to ensure that the bill that is before Parliament does not perpetuate these injustices. Bill C5 should be amended to ensure that judges have the ability to employ structured discretion and not impose mandatory minimum penalties, as was done in the cases of Odelia and Nerissa, as was part of what puts pressure on individuals like other women in this report to plead guilty, or puts pressure on the system to hold people responsible who aren't necessarily responsible. So I call on all of us to push hard to demand the kind of justice that Odelia, Nerissa, and so many other, in particular, Indigenous women deserve. So I want to thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this, and I look forward to any questions.
I would just like to mention we have less than 10 minutes left, and we will have to have room for questions.
Thank you so much. I first want to start out by commending Odelia for your courage to come forward. I'm here to stand in support of Odelia and Nerissa, the 12 women featured in the report. But as Senator Kim Pate said so well, they are not the only 12. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women was very clear. Indigenous women in this country, girls 2S LGBTQIA, continue to have to deal with an ongoing genocide. An ongoing genocide. This government promised to implement all 231 calls to justice. That includes issues and calls to justice related to the systemic racism that continues to be perpetuated in the justice system. And as we have seen in the recent Feminist Alliance report on international action, it continues to be targeted towards Indigenous women. 50% of the prison systems are now comprised by Indigenous women. This needs to change. This needs to change. And if this government is serious about reconciliation, then it needs to get serious about its ongoing participation in neocolonialism, which includes not acknowledging the impact that violent colonial histories continues to have on the lives of Indigenous women and diverse gendered individuals in this country. We need to address this now. So I call on Minister Lametti to do the right thing, to review these cases, and finally allow these sisters to have the justice that they deserve. Thank you very much.
My name is Nicole Porter from NA Porter and Associates. I want to thank everyone for joining this morning and for gathering here today in order to support these Indigenous sisters, Odelia and Nerissa. As you have heard before me, there has been a serious miscarriage of justice in this case, and we are calling on the Canadian government to free Odelia and Nerissa. My portfolio is justice-centered. I'm an advocate for the wrongfully convicted and for Indigenous rights across the country. I assisted Mr. David Milgaard in obtaining signatory support to our Prime Minister last year for the creation of an independent criminal case review board. A review board that would be necessary to review cases like Odelia and Nerissa's. Because as it stands right now, our Justice Minister, David Lametti, is the only person in the country who can step in. So I am now petitioning our government to release them immediately. One thing I've learned over the years is that wrongful conviction is a sad reality for many Canadians. Among other reasons, this can be attributed to an ineffective justice system. The very same system that put Odelia and Nerissa behind bars 30 years ago for a crime someone else confessed to and served his time for. Our criminal justice system is grossly overrepresented with vulnerable, particularly with Indigenous populations. This is only one of those cases. I officially became involved in this matter through David Milgaard, who was also advocating on behalf of Odelia and Nerissa. David was a passionate advocate for those who have been wronged by our system. He reached out to me and I offered to provide an independent forensic analysis. And what became very apparent to me very quickly was that both sisters have suffered a serious miscarriage of justice and have spent 30 years suffering for that wrongful conviction. These sisters are arguably the two longest serving inmates in Canada's penitentiary system, serving time for a crime that someone else confessed to. I started a petition to our federal justice minister, David Lametti, in 2021 with the change.org platform. The Congress of Aboriginal Peoples has also sponsored this initiative. I wanted to let both the country know what happened to Odelia and Nerissa and also to gather signatory support from citizens across the country. I wanted to call on the Canadian government to release these 2 women immediately. We have a responsibility as Canadian citizens to acknowledge the harm done to these Indigenous women and to rectify the miscarriage of justice. As I said a moment ago, our Justice Minister here in Canada is the only person who has the ability to start the process of overturning their convictions. An application for such a ministerial review has been filed, but the reality is it could take years. Years worth of additional time that Odelia and Nerissa would need to remain incarcerated. So the responsibility to rectify this lies solely in his hands right now. This petition is currently the top trending criminal justice petition in the country. We've obtained over 42,000 signatures so far. That's 800 pages worth of signatures. In addition to the sizable audience, efforts by the various groups involved and a growing public pressure on our government also helps to address systemic oppression of Indigenous people and creates an opportunity for you to make a difference. The petition can be found at change.org/freethesisters. If the public is wondering how they can get involved, please sign. Please share the petition. You'll notice a new call tool has been added, which will link signers to information on how to get in touch with David Lametti directly. Signers are urged to call, to email, or to message him, to send a polite yet firm message, to demonstrate as a country that we will not tolerate this type of injustice, to encourage him to remedy the situation. His contact information is provided to assist you in making that call and sending that email, or even a private message through social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram. He's the only person who can help these women. So we're urging the general public to assist by visiting change.org/freethesisters and do their part by sharing, by signing, and contacting him personally. We can't let another day pass because justice delayed is justice denied. Odelia and Nerissa have spent far too long in prison for a crime they did not commit. Thank you.
We will now proceed to questions. Journalists in the room can use the freestanding mic to ask their questions, and journalists online can use the raise hand function. We will start in the room.
Fraser Needham from AP10 National News. The first question is for Odelia. Now, you mentioned obviously you've spent a lot of your life up to this point in prison, and looking if you do get your sentence reviewed or you get exonerated, what do you think you would do with your what do you plan to do with your time and your life?
Well, first of all, like when I do get my freedom back, I'm gonna go home to be with my children. And right now, my children have resentments towards me. So I'm going to reassure them that they're okay and that that cycle that I've been through is broken, and, you know, they're safe and they have a mother, because I didn't have a mother growing up, and I don't want that to happen to them. And not only that, I want to help women that are in prison as well. You know, I want to be an advocate. I want to have a voice. So, and I would want to be like David Melgard, help people in my situation.
And just one quick question for Mr. Lockyer. So you mentioned a lot of things that we already know about the justice system in terms of it being not equitable, and we've had the reports, and everybody, and this government has actually acknowledged that the system is not fair to Indigenous people or racialized minorities, critical of mandatory sentences before they got elected. But here we are 7 years in, and a lot of these issues still exist, and the one thing the government hasn't done is really done much reform to the justice system. Why do you think that is?
Well, yeah, I mean, government moves slowly. I tend to think of it as moving like a snail with arthritis sometimes. But, you know, I have confidence in Minister Lametti. I filed the application with the minister on Christmas Eve of last year to review the convictions of the two sisters, and asking him to set them aside. And I'm confident that he will. I'm not so confident it'll happen quickly enough. It's a very, the ministerial review process, I've been involved in it in numerous cases. And if there's one thing you can say about it, it acts extremely slowly. And in the case of the two sisters, the Quewezance sisters, it mustn't. 30 years can't turn into 31, 32, 33, 34 years. It must stop at 30. 30 years is more than enough. So, as I say, I have confidence in the minister. Coincidentally, I ran into him as I walked into the courtyard this morning at the Parliament buildings, and we had a quick word, and I told him why I was here. And the last time I met him was with David Milgaard about 2 years ago, and he was very receptive to us then. And he said to me today that he wants to do something in David's memory, and freeing the Quewezance sisters would make nothing could make David Milgaard happier.
Is there any other questions in the room? If there's any questions online on Zoom, you may use the raise hand function.
While
now.
you're waiting for a question, I would like to add that these are policy decisions. There have been instances in history where governments have decided to utilize the royal prerogative of mercy and in a heartbeat have pardoned. Some of you will remember the grain farmers who had violated the law and were granted, after pardons had been released, were granted pardons. So this can be done. This could be done today if there is a political will. So thank you, all of you, for being here, because it is the kind of efforts that you assist with that help make these sorts of actions happen. So thank you very much for being here, and please, everybody, do what you can to ensure that the political will is there for the government to act.
I don't see any other questions at this point. I want to thank everybody for coming today. As you can hear, there was certainly a lot of points made today in reference to both Odelia and Nerissa, and also with respect to the justice system itself. As Aboriginal people or Indigenous people, we know the system is broken. And it's working for the Justice Department, but it's not working for us as Indigenous people. And we have a lot of work to do. And and it's funny too, the timing, like James said, when we run into Mr. Lametti this morning, it was like the Creator put him right there in front of us. I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised. And then also too, yesterday, the Auditor General released a report in reference to our people in the prison system, and it didn't paint a really pretty picture. And very thing I hear myself almost every day of the struggles of Indigenous people that are in prison. So, anyways, again, I want to thank you guys. Oh, sorry.
Odelia wants to come up just for a second.
Oh, okay. I guess Odelia wants to come up.
Today I just want to acknowledge David Milgaard, and when I heard of his passing, all his last words were like, he free Odelia, free Nerissa, and he could relate. And so the day after he passed away, we did a ceremony for him and just happened to pop up. So, this is for David Milgaard. May he rest in peace. And I pray for peace for me and my sister Nerissa. And I just want to acknowledge all my advocates and his people, and for believing me and giving thanks to Creator, because I know we're finally being heard. And I pray my sister continues to keep strong while she's there, because it's tough. And I also want to acknowledge all the other 12 women and people that are in prison in my circumstance. So today I pray for justice. Miigwech means thank you in my language. Hey.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you.